All righty. Usually when I do my weekly report from Olympia on Tuesdays, it's in my office, but we're in session these days. We just broke for lunch, and so here we are in the chamber. This is my workplace. I hope you don't mind my messy desk, but I'm a member of the Messy Desk Society, okay? There's three things I want to talk about this week. This is week 8, by the way. It's March 5th, 4th, 5th, something like that. And three things. One is the recent Supreme Court decision on the 2/3 majority being unconstitutional, the requirement in statute. Second is about searches of children in schools by disciplinary officers, some of whom are in uniform. And not only the Supreme Court's take on that, but a recent decision of this body yesterday, that I feel is a very poor substitute for truly protecting kids from outside intruders that have guns. That's the way it was sold, though, so don't get me started. And the third thing I want to talk to you is about a change that we're trying to make in developmental disabilities, in the treatment of the most vulnerable people, changing from an institutional model to a model that really features people living in the community. Let's go to the 2/3 requirement first. Our Constitution, our state Constitution does, in fact, have a couple of instances in which a supermajority is required. Gambling bills and a constitutional amendment before it goes out to the people for a regular majority vote. Those have to be done by a supermajority. Those are disfavored, in other words, as a matter of policy. You don't easily amend the Constitution. You don't easily institute gambling, or at least that was the way it was felt in 1889 when the founding fathers, sorry, they were all fathers, decided that. Well, a 2/3 requirement can't be set up in a statute then, if it's a constitutional element. And further, when it is, as it was in Tim Eyman's amendments, what it does is to give the minority extra leverage that they would never otherwise have. We don't want to do that. This is a democracy. Majority rules, not by 2/3, but by simple majority. That's the way our founding fathers and mothers decided it was, and I agree. We've been asked to institute that same nefarious rule in in the Senate rules, that is the rules that are the organic body of the Senate. And no, I'm in no vote on that if we ever decide to do that. Count me out. I suspect that that's a drastic way to do it, and that the people who favor this 2/3 are getting kind of desperate. Let's go on to school searches. Before a police officer searches anybody on a street, they have to have a high standard of reasonable belief that some kind of a crime is being committed. It's called probable cause, and that is probable cause that a crime is being or has been committed. Not simply the guy looks suspicious, but you can't articulate it. You have to be able to articulate it. It's a high bar, and it should be, because a search is an intrusion. You know, you're spread out on a public street, everybody's driving by, somebody's patting you down. That's embarrassing. You don't do that regularly just for the hell of it. Somebody's the wrong color, somebody's in the wrong place where there are no people like him there, It's an intrusion. Now, there is a counterbalancing feeling that in schools, kids are the subjects of discipline. Discipline has to be imposed in order for the kids who want to learn to be able to. We want school discipline. And so our Supreme Court and the U.S. Supreme Court both recognized a lower standard for school disciplinary officers. I can live with that. I'm a libertarian, but I get it, okay? It's a balancing of interests. Supreme Court, our state Supreme Court, decided last year that a off-duty police officer who works as a school resource officer, as they call them, is not a school disciplinary officer, and therefore a search done by that officer at the lower standard doesn't hold. It can't lead to a prosecution. The evidence that you get thereby is not admissible. So there's a bill here, as there always is, to quote unquote correct the Supreme Court. What this would do is to make, by statute, the school resource officer a disciplinary officer. We're not changing the Constitution. Oh, no, no, no. We're not changing the Constitution. We're just admitting an officer to a constitutionally lower standard of search than would apply on the street. I led the opposition among the Democrats. We got 19 votes against it. That's not enough to stop it. It's 30 to 19. It's going over to the House. But when the House sees that, and they see that vote, and they do, and they see all the opponents of it, I'm sad to say that all but one of us were Democrats. Only one Republican could come along, a true libertarian, and vote with us on that. When the House sees that, it's not going to pass. That bill is effectively dead when it gets there. But why it bothers me more than anything is not just the lowering of a constitutional protected, lowering of the constitutional protection for a class, but the rationale that was given on this floor. And that is, we're going to better protect our kids against guns because the kid who brings a backpack is going to more likely get searched. Now, wait a minute. We are not going to make guns less easily accessible, but if the kid does bring one in the school, we're going to make the kid more searchable. Oh, that works. But that's the kind of pretzel logic that applies around here. That's what really got me ticked about this bill. Okay, enough of that. Let's talk about my somewhat frustrated attempts to bring along the state of Washington in the science of dealing with developmentally disabled people. Big institutions, big bedrooms with 40 people sleeping in them. And by the way, I remember that from when I used to work at Rainier School. That kind of stuff doesn't work. It's a fiction from the 19th and 20th centuries, early 20th century, when young couples, until even the 1930s, 40s, 50s, having given birth to a developmentally disabled child, were told, oh, we're sorry, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, you shouldn't really have that child with you at home. Let us take that child to an institution. And so entire generations of people came in as children, grew old, and died in institutions without having been with their families, lived in the community, had the intellectual stimulation of people coming by, people from outside, the normality of simply living in the community. Since the 1970s, and it's something I remember from when I first worked at the institutions, the science, the treating professionals have gotten the idea, no, we've got to bring people out in the community where there's intellectual stimulation and they can be closer to their family, they can be part of daily life, taken on trips, integrated as much as their own intellectual ability will allow into the community. That, I believe, is not simply an idea, not simply a philosophy, but a moral imperative that, in fact, our U.S. Supreme Court has imported into the essence of due process. Due process, a constitutional requirement, requires that people be treated in as little structured a place as their ability will allow. And so that's what we're doing in a bill that I have before the legislature. Unfortunately, it seems like there are two factions within the larger DD community. Those, mostly the elderly parents of now adult children who are the last generation to live in the institutions, and the typically younger parents of people who have been raised in the community. I think this is a generational transition caused by the fact that our state Department of Social Services has not entered more people into this, the institutions for a very long time. A few people, but not a lot. And so the last generation to be entered is, by attrition, slowly dying out. Nobody wants to simply take people out of the structured life that they've lived in and throw them into the community. We don't want to do that. But there is a way to encourage the guardians and families to help their developmentally disabled family members make that transition voluntarily and with a great deal of care and a great deal of love. The bill that I have would simply begin that process. It would authorize the department to introduce people to the community, to have parents of the community-related or community-based residents become kind of ambassadors of goodwill. It would remove the names from the institutions. In other words, allow the department to begin to close them administratively, and basically to make some progress in allowing the department to better respond to those few instances, but they do happen, where people have abused or neglected developmentally disabled folks. Unfortunately, I think it had too much in it that required too much thinking for the Senate Committee on Healthcare to take up this year. So it died in committee, as did a lot of other good bills. Equally lucky, the House, which has a very different majority and consequently a very different take on this, is sending over that bill, the same version of my bill. I intend to fight for that House version here on the floor and see if we can't make some progress, even in the year 2013. Well, thanks for visiting with me. Sorry for the messy desk, but that's the news from Lake Wobegon.